What is democracy? You might be commonly aware that democracy in its literal nature is defined that the concentration of power is in the hands of the people. For some, democracy is a symbol of liberation, such that unheard voices can speak again without fearing the consequences of their actions. And for others, democracy is a system that is grounded in the rule of law, such that free and fair elections can be held. However, the question of what is and what is not democracy is not the question that I will be criticizing, but it is the question of whether democracy still stands as a prosperous system in the 21st century that I will begin to assess. Does democracy still appeal today as a system that should be put on a pedestal? From the understanding of the article, What's Gone Wrong with Democracy, The Economist doesn't think so. The Economist argues that democracy is actually losing its momentum as an appealing example of a successful system. Why, you might ask? The Economist criticizes that voters are the reason why democracy has actually undermined itself. The Economist justifies that voters demand too much and expect too much, thus causing rulers in a democratic system to make short-term promises that they cannot uphold. Rulers are forced to overthink issues that do not need to be exaggerated, in which nothing gets done. I disagree with The Economist for two reasons. One, The Economist argues that the people are the cause to the downfall of democracy. But what is democracy without the people? If The Economist is suggesting that voters loosen their demand, then The Economist is wrong. This demand, together with the rule of law, is needed as a power limitation to the ruler. If this demand is loosened, it allows rulers to take advantage of their power. Governments need to be held accountable and can only be legitimized by the consensus of the wider parts of the populace. What I mean by an accountable and legitimate government, according to the textbook Democratization by Oxford, is when citizens have the ability to reward the political officials or leaders so as to induce them to act in the interest of the citizens. Only so would the political system itself be accepted. The Economist may respond, yes, that is exactly the problem. You see, voters will never be satisfied. That is why democracy seems to always fail. But is the problem really in the voters then? This is my second argument. If the voters are not satisfied, then the problem lies in those in the government. According to Aung San Suu Kyi, a democratic leader who is fighting for democracy in Burma, argues that a stable government lives and rules in truth. This truth is the ruler's recognition of his or her limitation of power. If they aren't recognizing this limitation, then the people have the right to question the government until the people are satisfied. After The Economist argues why, The Economist began to map out how democracy came to lose its appeal as a system. The Economist measures democracy in three separate chronological events in which The Economist calls them setbacks of democracy. This includes Russia, the Iraq War, and Egypt. According to The Economist, the first setback lies in the critical event in Russia at the end of 1999 when power was handed to Vladimir Putin, only to have the substance of democracy destroyed. The Economist argues that democracy was destroyed due to Putin's lack of recognition and practice of the rule of law. The second setback of democracy is the Iraq War in 2003. The Economist argues that this particular event did the democratic cause great harm and was proof that democracy was just a fig leaf for American imperialism. And lastly, the third set of democracy is Egypt. In 2011, the world watched as the people of Egypt overthrew Hosni Mubarak and his regime. Yasmin al-Rashidi, an activist in Egypt's 2011 uprisings, reminisces this exact moment in the diaries of the Unfinished Revolution, saying, I witnessed in the waiting time of those days until 5:56 p.m. on February 11th, dignity restored. However, The Economist argues that Egypt, although brought a sense of hope for democracy, went only so far to bring Egypt back to its initial state. After the 2012 elections in which Mohamed Morsi took power, President Morsi treated democracy as a winner-takes-all system and granted himself almost unlimited powers. In 2013, the army stepped in and took control and arrested Egypt's first democratically elected president, imprisoned members of the Brotherhood, and killed many demonstrators. Within 2 years, Egypt was back at the start of a new revolution. These setbacks, the economist argues, demonstrates a further explanation as to show how democracy is no longer a functional systematic model for new democracies. Democracy is corrupted, he argues, and is too slow for democratic processes to begin. I disagree with the economist for two reasons. One, the measurement of the effectiveness of democracy should not be measured by events. Democracy should measure what it claims to measure in its ideologies and principles. Events play as an interaction variable to the democratization process, but not a confounding one. Robert Dahl argues that the only two dimensions of measurement for democracy are citizen participation and competition between political parties. My second argument is this. The economist argues that a democratic process is a slow one in newly developed democracies, but that is only due to the lack of democratic preconditions. These democratic preconditions, such as the right to vote, the right to run for public office, freedom of association, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press, must be established before the democratic process even begins. It is seen in Egypt's conditions before its 2011 uprisings. They met none of these precondition standards. This is a possible explanation as to how democracy fell so quickly in Egypt. The economist may have had a concentrated argument against democracy, but his measurements need to be evaluated further to validate the claims that the economist has made. Democracy is not lost. Just because it is in some countries does not mean that it has in others. Just because democracy is slow does not mean it has failed as a system. So then, what is democracy? Democracy promotes the welfare of the people. Democracy is where even the man on the street is heard. Democracy is an impossible thing until the power is shared by all. Thank you.